Before she was the Member of Parliament for Markham Stouffville, Jane Philpott was a family doctor, a professor, and Chief of Family Medicine at Markham Stouffville Hospital. In 2015, she was part of Justin Trudeau's Sunny Ways team, elected to do politics differently. As part of the first ever 50-50 male-female cabinet, she was appointed Minister of Health. Then came SNC and a decision on principle to resign from cabinet, and well, as you know, the rest is history. It led to her running in the last election as an independent, and here to reflect on some very heady times in politics, here's Dr. Jane Philpott. It's nice to have you in that chair.
Thanks for having me.
Shall I remind you what you were doing a month ago?
Oh, I have a pretty good recollection.
You do. Well, let's remind everybody else, just in case they weren't up in York Region on that night. Okay. Sheldon, the clip, if you would, please.
What an incredible journey we have been on together. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for every day that we have been together over the last weeks and months and years. We are here tonight to celebrate. We are here to celebrate an exceptional, independent campaign.
That's, of course, you, election night, almost exactly a month ago. And as you look at it a month later, what's going through your head?
Well, I still look back with incredible happiness and thankfulness for what was a very positive, inspiring local campaign, surrounded by hundreds of people who believed in doing politics differently and wanted to get behind a strong independent candidate. And we ran a great campaign.
I should say just independent candidacies usually go absolutely nowhere. Sheldon, let's bring this graphic up here. You did, for an independent candidate, do extremely well. Helena Jasic from the Liberals ended up taking the night with 39% of the vote, just about. The Conservatives in second. But here's you in third place as an independent candidate with nearly 21% of the vote. Did you at any point, because I know everybody told you, Jane, this is a dumb idea, don't bother doing this. Did you at any point actually think you'd win this seat?
Well, you don't run and work as hard as we did without believing that you can win. And as I say, we had an incredible team of people. I think we worked harder than any of the other candidates. We knocked on every door once and got almost around the second time with just a huge amount of energy. We had very positive interactions at the door with people who were grateful for the way I had represented them. But at the end of the day, people stick with their parties pretty loyally along the way.
Is that the lesson, really? It's tribal. It's always going to be tribal. It always has been tribal.
I'm not sure that I can totally evaluate all of the lessons that were behind it. You know, obviously, Dr. Jasic, who won, she'll be a great member of Parliament. She's well liked in the community.
You know her well, I presume.
I know her quite well. I've helped her on campaigns before. So
both medical doctors.
Exactly. So that's not entirely the story, but there are people who are dedicated to their parties, and it's pretty hard for them to imagine not necessarily voting for an independent, but their worry was, what will an independent be able to do in Parliament? And because we haven't got a long history in Canada of proving to people that actually, like in many other countries, independent parliamentarians can get a lot done for their constituents and for their country. But that's an untested model to a certain extent.
Well, one did win. Mm-hmm. And you and I both saw her yesterday.
Yes.
Jody Wilson-Raybould. We saw her down at the Real Estate Association convention where you and she did an event together. Have you two, so I know you've talked, but have you managed to sort of touch base enough and compare notes enough to find out why she managed to win as an independent?
Well, she, of course, is an extraordinary person, worked hard for her riding, is highly esteemed across the country.
Okay, they can say the same things about you, but she got across the finish line and you didn't.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think people in British Columbia are a little bit more prepared to vote for non-red, non-blue. You know, Greens tend to have a bit better chance. in BC, where people are not necessarily feeling like they have to stick with the traditional parties. It's a little hard to say what all the factors are. At the end of the day, there are people who are more expert than I at political analysis, but I'm thrilled that she did win, and I think she's going to have an impact.
The one comment I hear from former politicians all the time, and I guess you are now a former politician, is that the phone stops ringing once you're no longer in. And I wonder if that's been the case for you.
Well, I would say not entirely. The phone has still been relatively active. You know, a lot of the things that I did as a parliamentarian and as a minister, I did because those issues matter a tremendous amount to me. So you look at issues like pharmacare, like progressive drug policy, like Indigenous rights and well-being. People from all those kinds of groups have been contacting me, asking me to speak, asking me to work with them. People know that for me, politics was not about getting a position of power. It was about being able to use the tool of government to be able to improve people's lives, improve society. And I can find other ways to do that same kind of work, and hopefully those opportunities will come forward.
But you still got to make a living. Can you do all of that and make a living at the same time?
Of course.
You can.
I mean, I'm a medical doctor. I can make a living, you know, I can start to ask for your OHIP number right now and make a living. But, you know, it's a question of what, as I say, what is the best way to use your time? That's what my question to myself is. Given the experiences that I've had and the opportunities, how can I use the days, weeks, or years that I have left in my life to the very best possible outcome for other people, to make individuals healthier and to make society stronger. And there are lots of ways to do that and be able to make a living.
Is practicing medicine one of the things you're looking at?
It's one of the possibilities. I'm a big believer in the need for strengthening health at the population level. And while obviously doing it at the patient one-on-one level is incredibly important, and we're very grateful for doctors that do that every day, I feel like the experiences that I have had have put me in a position where I'd like to work in an area that I can have a big impact on population health.
What is, I'm going to take a moment here just to sort of remind people about your trajectory beyond what we said in the introduction, because you were, when you were in the Liberal cabinet, and Justin Trudeau said this all the time, you were one of the go-to people. I mean, when he had a big problem, he brought in Dr. Jane. And then you go from that to resigning from cabinet, to being kicked out of caucus, to running as an independent. I mean, as things go in politics, that is a lonelier path each step of the way. And I'm real curious as to how you personally have dealt with all of those steps.
Well, I loved being a cabinet minister, of course, because of what I was able to do. I mean, I'm thrilled that I was chair of the ad hoc committee on Syrian refugees. And when the Prime Minister said, we need 25,000 Syrian refugees here by the end of the year, that I worked alongside John McCallum and an incredible team of public servants, and we got the job done. And when the Prime Minister said, you know, we need legislation on medical assistance in dying by the end of June, we got the job done. When the Prime Minister said, I need you to go into Indigenous services and you need to get that system cranked up so that we can lift long-term drinking water advisories and public systems on reserve, we again put together an amazing team of people and really moved the system. So I'm proud of every single one of those things. But, you know, 2019 turned out a little bit differently.
Turned out a lot differently.
I would not perhaps have predicted it all. But you know what? My goal as a politician is to serve every day of my life, and my goal as a person is that as well. But I have to serve with my integrity intact. And the issues that came up around the handling of SNC-Lavalin were such that I could not maintain solidarity with the government's approach on that matter. And the one thing that I wasn't prepared to give up was my own integrity.
You do know, I think our listeners and watchers appreciate that, but you do know that if you had been able to, and I'll just grab this expression because I can't think of a better one right now, but if you'd been able to put a little water in your wine over that issue As one does in politics every day of one's life, you know, you'd still be in cabinet. You'd probably have a bigger job right now in cabinet. You might be talked about as potential replacement material for the Prime Minister if and when he decides to move on. You know, there's an Ontario Liberal leadership happening right now. I know people have been talking to you about running in that. I mean, just the range of options about what your life would look like right now would be very different. All of which is to ask, you don't have any second guessing about your decision?
So you talked about being willing to compromise, put water in my wine. Of course, over the 3.5 years I was in cabinet, there were times I had to compromise. I can't say that every single decision around that cabinet table was exactly this decision I would have made as a single person, but I was able to agree with the group decision and go out in solidarity. On this particular issue, the independence of the prosecution, the fact that politicians cannot, should not, must not interfere with very serious criminal trials. They shouldn't interfere with any criminal trial, but this was no small thing. I've lived and worked in West Africa. I understand what happens when governments do step in and interfere with whether it's the police services or the judiciary or the prosecution. People's lives are affected by that, and it's one of the fundamental pillars of our democracy. And I had to stand up in defense of it.
But you got 27, 28, 29 cabinet colleagues who all thought it was okay. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, people say, why didn't you just do what people have been doing all along? You know, these things have been happening over the years. And then you'd have people say, well, you know, don't you know when companies work in Libya that that's the cost of doing business? Well, just because people have been doing something all along doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I had a standard of a belief that our Constitution was founded in such a way that the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judicial branch of government have their own distinct and separate roles, and the executive is never to interfere with the judicial branch. And I am not going to be the person that says that's okay.
Have you heard from any of your former Liberal caucus or cabinet colleagues since the election was over?
Yes, I've heard from several.
From several?
Yeah.
What percentage of your former Liberal friends do you think are still Jane Philpott friends?
Well, you know, I hope some of them are. There are some who I would say are still genuine friends. There are some people who still are angry with me. I have no doubt about that. I hope over time that we can build a respectful relationship. I have, you know, the Liberals are forming a government there, and I wish them the absolute best because it is in the best interests of the people of Canada that they are successful. So I hope that over time people will realize that when we make decisions, we have to be grown-ups about it, and we have to continue to work together. And their decision at the time of those issues in the spring may not have been the same as mine, but I made my decisions based on what I believe is the best for our country. I have no reason to believe that they don't make their decisions every day on the basis of the same thing. We made different decisions, but we have to set aside those differences and figure out how we can work together. This is a time of tremendous divisiveness, not only in our country, but around the world. And unless we respect one another and collaborate, Canadians will suffer.
Let me pick up on that. Here's your friend, Jody Wilson-Raybould, who was on this program a couple of months ago. Sheldon, the clip, please.
Well, of course, I appreciate and understand the role of being Prime Minister and the extraordinary number of decisions that a Prime Minister has to make. There are 338 members of Parliament in the House of Commons, all of whom come from every corner of this country. And bringing 338 people together to debate and have discussions around important issues, I think it's important to move as much as we can away from that hyper-partisan nature that is very adversarial and not necessarily conducive to having the necessary discussions that we need to have on important issues like climate change, like Indigenous reconciliation, like healthcare. We need to take the best solutions that we have and work as much as we can towards that consensus-based decision-making.
What do you think the chances are in a hung parliament of taking out what she called that hyper-partisan atmosphere?
Well, I think the chances are better in a hung parliament, if that's the term we like to use, in a minority government than they are in a majority government, because by nature, those in power will have to collaborate to get things done. And so you look at an issue like pharmacare, which is extremely important to me. The NDP and Greens have both said that it's very important to them as well. And on an issue like that, it's not a matter of if there will be pharmacare or not, but how it's done. Will it be universal? Will it be single-payer public pharmacare? And if the NDP and Greens can effectively convince the Prime Minister and his government that it has to be a particular way or they won't support it, then that could be really good news for Canadians. We could get actually the best possible pharmacare system.
In our last couple of minutes here, is your political career over?
I don't know. I don't know, Steve. I'm still thinking about it. Some opportunities have been presented to me that are very interesting that might take me out of politics if I agree to go that direction. But I haven't made my mind for sure. I have agreed to do a bit of work, at least in the short term, with the wonderful folks in Anishinaabe Nation, helping them around the fantastic work they're doing on health transformation and in the remote First Nations of Northern Ontario. So I'll be doing some of that, at least in the short term, as I try to decide a longer term plan. But we'll see. As I say, politics for me it wasn't the target. It was a tool. It was a tool to make people's lives better.
No, I get
and
that.
There are lots of tools that I could use. If politics isn't one of them, I'll find another way.
I get that, but you also have a lot of, in that toolkit, you have a lot of the things that politicians would give their eye teeth for. Very high name recognition, integrity intact, demonstrated before the whole country, and the list goes on. Kind of feels like it would be a bit of a waste not to test drive that a little further, don't you think?
Well, we'll see. I'm going to take a little pause at this point, not jump in. There certainly are still, parties that have been reaching out, and
name names.
I'm not naming any names right now.
Did you think about running for the Ontario Liberal leadership?
I would say I did think about it a little bit, but it's not the right time for me to do something like that. And they've got some good candidates, and I wish them the best. So we'll see. There are other options available.
You can imagine having your name on a ballot again, though. I can see that. You can imagine
I am
that.
not sure. At this point, I can also imagine a world where I find some other incredibly satisfying work. And if that is to be, I'm prepared to set politics aside as long as I don't have to waste my days, doing something that's not meaningful. I'm in a privileged position to be able to do meaningful work. I've been put here on this planet and given a whole lot of opportunities. I want to use my days for something that will make a difference, and I'll be able to say that I've lived my life well.
Whichever path you take, we wish you well.
Thank you.
That's Dr. Jane Philpott, formerly the independent candidate in the last federal election. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.